In this video, we're going to look at how properly using textual evidence can add length to your paper, boost your grade, and help you avoid plagiarism. So whenever I'm teaching writing, I tell my students to follow this sort of formula for fabricating their ideas. You start with evidence. After you've compiled it, you look for patterns, and then you develop your thesis. And what I mean by evidence is textual evidence. All of what I'm talking about today has to do with writing about literature, but it could be used for writing about a lot of different things. So your textual evidence is what the characters are saying, how a situation's described, whatever it might be. But after you've gathered that evidence and you found your patterns and you figured out your thesis, you're good to write your paper. What this means, though, is that when you're using textual evidence, it should be guiding your paper, not thrown in at the last minute. I hate it when students ask me how many quotes they need after they've written their papers. I'll answer that question, by the way, how many quotes you need in a paper, so stick around to get that answer, because a lot of people seem to want to know the answer to it. So if your quotes are guiding your paper, then you'll already pretty much know how many quotes you need as you're writing your paper. But you need to have the quotes. And if you have the quotes, then the rest of this video is going to be very useful for you because we're going to talk about how to properly use them. A lot of students have great textual evidence, but they're not using it properly. So let's figure out what's the best way to use textual evidence. All right, I'm going to be breaking down 4 strategies. The first one is paraphrase and cite. This strategy is fantastic for helping you avoid plagiarism. Here's an example. This is a paper I wrote in college. It says, however, Byron's exploit and subsequent poetry describing it spurred thousands more to attempt the crossing, with hundreds accomplishing this task. Marchard 239. Byron's writings not only inspired others to attempt the crossing, but they helped elevate the sport of swimming to unparalleled heights throughout the decades following the publication of Cestos to Abydos. Craig Reedon 33-37. Now, Cestos to Abydos down at the bottom is in quotes, but that's because it's the name of the poem, not something that I'm quoting from that source. So both of these sources I'm paraphrasing in the same paragraph, and when I'm done with the part that I'm using from Marchard, I write Marchard 239, that's the page number where that information's at. Same with Craig and Reed 33-37. If I don't put that there, I'm plagiarizing. Even though I'm using all my own words, I'm getting ideas from these two sources. And if someone's reading my paper and they want to figure out more about what I'm talking about there, that's where they need to go. That's why we cite this sort of stuff, so that people can build off of our research. Also, so that we don't go to school jail for plagiarizing. So that's a great way to cover yourself at the end of a paragraph. Put where that information came from, or halfway through a paragraph. However, if a student turned in a paper to me and all they did was summarize other people's ideas and cite them without ever directly quoting, I would have a hard time believing a lot of what they're arguing in that paper, or at least seeing how they're supporting it. So you need to go a step further, but this is the first one, the most basic one, paraphrase and cite. After paraphrase and cite, we have incorporate into your own words. So this is a fantastic way to quote material quickly and use shorter quotes. A lot of times people think they need to use the whole sentence. Sometimes you only need to use 2 words. Let's say we're talking about Great Gatsby here. We want to talk about Daisy and how she likes money and men with money like her. So you might have this sentence. I think this is actually a pretty decent sentence. Daisy likes money and men with money like Daisy. All right, it gets the point across. However, as a reader, I might be wondering, well, what do you mean Daisy likes money? She could like these people just for who they are. Probably not, knowing her husband. But, how do you know she likes money, or how do you know she's attracted to money? So you can add a quote in there, and now the sentence is, Daisy has a voice like money and men with money like Daisy. So there's some things lost with this sentence. It doesn't have quite the bookended feel that the first one has. But what's gained, and at least for this example works really well, is that we now have text from The Great Gatsby in there. And because we have this little quote, the reader knows we know what we're talking about. That we've read the book, we've read it carefully to find 3 words that work well. And if they want to find those words and read more about them, they know to turn to page 23. All right, the third style of how to use textual evidence has to do with introducing quotes in your writing. So let's turn to another famous literary example here, Hamlet. So I see this sort of sentence all the time. Hamlet is depressed. To be or not to be, that is the question. And it's cited properly, Act 3, Scene 1, line 65, but the actual flow of the sentence is quite harsh. Hamlet is depressed. To be or not to be, that is the question. It sort of comes out of nowhere and just hits you like a ton of bricks. Now, you don't want to say Hamlet says to be or not to be, that is the question, because that's pretty boring too. A little bit better, but it's a really, really weak introduction. And I think the easiest way to introduce longer quotes like this in your paper is a colon. And a lot of students are afraid to use a colon, but proper colon use is almost as important in writing as it is in digestion. And it's actually not that difficult to use in your writing either. So take a look at this. Depressed Hamlet questions his existence. To be or not to be, that is the question. Now that's not the greatest because he questions his existence and that is the question. But you can see how the colon is helping that flow. It connects your writing to the quote. It's not like it suddenly stops. All right, the fourth and final thing you can do is using a block quote. Now this is when you want to use quite a large quote. So if you look at the example here, paraphrase and cite, you're not quoting at all, you're just paraphrasing, so no quote. Incorporate into your own words, short quote, introduce, longer quote, medium, and a block quote is the longest quote. An MLA format, which is what everything I'm showing you is in MLA format. However, it still applies to APA, Chicago, Turabian. It's just going to look a little different. An MLA format, once you're past 4 lines of something, it needs to be in a block quote. Personally, I don't use block quotes all that often, but sometimes they are the best way to go. As a teacher, when I see a block quote, I'm usually suspicious, is this student just trying to eat up space? And maybe they are, but if they're doing it well, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you're quoting properly, then good on you. So let's look at a block quote here. Again, from a paper on Lord Byron. The speaker upholds this water plane above the plains of the land, for only it remains immune to humankind's conquest, settlement, and ruination. The final lines of stanza 179 depict the fate of those who dare impose their will on the ocean. The wrecks are all thy deed, nor doth remain a shadow of man's ravage, save his own, when for a moment, like a drop of rain, he sinks into the depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. These lines show the futility of humankind's attempt to tame the ocean even for the purpose of travel. So this block quote here, you'll notice a couple things. It's introduced with a colon. Again, typically that's how it's done. Doesn't have to be. It could be a comma depending on the sentence, but usually it's going to be a colon. There is no quotation marks in an MLA format with a block quote. Because the quote is indented, that counts as the quotation mark. The reader is supposed to be able to tell just from that you're quoting. You'll also notice that it doesn't end the paragraph. Very rarely do you want to end a paragraph with a block quote, but I see a lot of beginning writers make that mistake. If you're going to make someone read 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 lines of something, you need to tell them why. It needs to be introduced well, and then it needs to be followed up incredibly well. Nothing you read do you finish and think, oh, I wish this was like 10 pages longer but said the exact same thing. So don't do that to your teacher or professor, whoever's reading your paper. They don't want to waste their time either. So if you're using a block quote, I caution you to make sure that you are using it properly, that it's the best way to use that quote, and that it's also explained really well. Okay, finally, I want to take you through a master class on quotation usage. This comes from the wonderful scholar Bernard Knox, and he's writing about a play called Antigone by Sophocles. If you're not familiar with it, there's some major spoilers, but it's been out for 2,000 years, so if you haven't read it by now, I'm sorry. But anyway, I mean, it's Greek tragedy, everyone dies. So in Antigone, she wants to bury her brother because he's, died, and that's the cultural and familial and religious thing to do, to bury the dead. But her uncle and the ruler of Thebes, Creon, does not want the body buried. And in order to exercise his will over Antigone, who wants to bury this person that Creon sees as a traitor, he basically sentences her to death and accidentally kills most of his family because of the chain reaction of Antigone's death. So let's take a look at what Bernard Knox is saying about Antigone here. And again, you don't need to know anything about Antigone, more than what I just told you. What you need to do is look at how he uses quotes. So this is his topic sentence. It's a bit of a doozy. And for Antigone's appeals to Hades, the great god of the underworld for whom the dead belong, Creon has nothing but contempt. For him, Hades is simply a word meaning death, a sentence he is prepared to pass on to anyone who stands in his way. So this is a long introduction to the paragraph, a long topic sentence here, but you'll notice the first part of it is basically just transitioning from his previous paragraph, which he's doing really, really well. The meat of this topic sentence is, Creon has nothing but contempt for Hades, is simply a word meaning death, a sentence he's prepared to pass on to anyone who stands in his way. So he has no reverence for death. He uses it as a tool to destroy his enemies and enforce his hold on the city. So let's look at the paragraph that he has here, picking up after the topic sentence. He threatens the sentry with torture as a simple prelude. Simple death won't be enough for you, 340. When asked if he really intends to deprive Haman of his bride, he answers sarcastically, death will do it for me, 630. He expects to see Antigone and Ismene turn coward once they see death coming for their lives, 635 to 36. With a derisive comment, he tells his son to abandon Antigone, spit her out, let her find a husband down among the dead in Hades' house, 704 to 05. And he dismisses Antigone's reverence for Hades and the rights of the dead with mockery, as he condemns her to be buried alive. There, let her pray to the one God she worships, death, 837 to 38. But this Hades is not something to be so lightly referred to, used, or mocked. And the great choral ode which celebrated man's progress and the powers, this was man's progress and powers, this was the one insurmountable obstacle that confronted him. Ready, resourceful man, never without resources, never an impasse as he marches on the future. Only death, from death alone, he will find no rescue. 381, 393 to 97. Same paragraph here. And Creon, in the end, looking at the corpse of his son and hearing the news of his wife's suicide, speaks of Hades for the first time with the fearful respect that is his due, not as an instrument of policy or a subject of sardonic wordplay, but as a divine power, a dreadful presence, harborer of death, so choked, so hard to cleanse. Why me? Why are you killing me? 1350 to 51. So that is a long paragraph, and if you count up the number of quotes he uses in there, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 quotes in the paragraph. And he's using a number of different types of quotes. You'll notice the majority of them, though, are a simple colon. And that's all you really need to do. There's one where he just incorporates it into his own words. That works pretty well. And there's a block quote when he wants to give part of the chorus there. But just a colon usually suffices for introducing a quote, and then you follow it up. Now, a couple other amazing things that I think Knox does here is you'll notice that he's basically going through the play. The quotes, for the most part, till you get to the choral ode, go in order. And a lot of times students are tempted to just summarize a work that they're writing about, and you've probably been told by your teacher, hey, don't do that. And that's for good purpose. We've already read it. We don't need you to summarize it. But if you are summarizing with precision, looking at all these instances of how Creon is abusing the word death, then that's not really summary, that's analysis. And that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And it's okay to march through, if it fits your argument, to march through that chronologically through a work. But you'll notice again that Knox breaks from this chronology when he gets to the part about the choral ode, because he's given all these examples of what Creon's done, and now he's showing, hey, even the chorus has pointed out early in the play that humans have no power over death. That's the one thing we cannot overcome. And then the final quote comes right from the very end of the play, and it's a very powerful one. I don't even think it needs explained because he's introduced it so well. And this is just one paragraph, 6 quotes. I told you earlier I'd tell you how many quotes you need. Probably more than 1 in a paragraph, and probably more than 2. It's really, really important to remember when you're quoting, you're trying to establish a pattern, right? You're trying to gather evidence. There's a reason why we call it evidence. So if you're trying to gather evidence that I am a criminal, and your only evidence is that one time I jaywalked, you're probably not going to successfully put me behind bars if you're a prosecutor. Now, if you have a string of jaywalks, I might get fined for jaywalking, or if you have evidence of a more serious crime, I might actually be put behind bars. I don't know why all of a sudden we're trying to put me behind bars. I'm not guilty of anything, I don't think. But the point remains the same. One instance does not a pattern or a behavior make. It's an instance. It can be powerful, but if you're talking about Daisy being in love with money, you can't just quote one thing. If you're talking about Hamlet being full of inaction until a certain point, you can't just quote one thing. If you're talking about his antic disposition, you can't just quote one thing. You need to pull from throughout the play. And when you use textual evidence, your reader knows you know what you're talking about. It builds trust and it allows the reader to see your words for what they are. So chances are you have some good ideas. You just need to figure out when to paraphrase and cite, when to incorporate it into your own words, when to introduce it with a colon, and when to make it a block quote. And if you have a combination of those throughout your paper, you should be good to go. It'll make your paper a little bit longer, should definitely make it stronger. And as long as you're citing properly, there's no way you can be plagiarizing. So if you do all that, you should be good to go. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to help you out. And happy writing. Stick with it. Use some good quotes and go get an A.